Hello and welcome to the Institute for China-America Studies' first virtual American Voices Initiative. My name is Matthew Geraci, Research Associate and Program Officer with ICAS. I am pleased to introduce Ambassador Craig Allen, President of the US-China Business Council, which represents over 200 American companies doing business with China. We are also joined by ICAS Senior Fellow Sourabh Gupta, who will conduct today's one-on-one interview with Ambassador Allen. Ambassador Craig Allen has had a long and distinguished career in U.S. public service, beginning his engagements with China in 1986, when he served as an international economist in the International Trade Administration's China office. He would later be assigned to different U.S. embassies, including the U.S. Embassy in Beijing and the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, where he served as a commercial attaché. His public service experience culminated in being sworn in as ambassador to Brunei Darussalam from December 2014 through 2018. Following his return in 2018, he has since transitioned to president of the US-China Business Council. From the turbulent negotiations over the Phase 1 trade deal to a growing push towards economic decoupling, American businesses have been left scrambling to adapt to the ever-evolving US-China relationship, which has been exacerbated even further as a result of the global COVID-19 pandemic. To top it all off, the fierceness of the US election has cast even more uncertainty as to how American business should plan to engage with China in the coming years. There are very few in this country who have had a more intimate, close-up view of the ups and downs of this tumultuous US-China commercial relationship over these past 20 months more than you. On this note, on behalf of ICAS and its scholars, we are honored to have you here today to discuss these and other pressing issues that will impact the American business community and US-China relations overall. Thank you again for joining us. Sourabh, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. And thank you, Ambassador Allen, for being our newest distinguished guest on American Voices Initiative. Let's dive right into the questions. As a frequent traveler to China, although presumably not this year, and a keen observer of the country, what is the general mood like there on the ground with regard to bilateral ties, with regard to next steps on reform, generally with regard to outlook on post-COVID-19 near and medium-term future? Optimism, pessimism, where is it?
Okay, well, firstly, thank you very much for having me today. Very delighted to be a part of this initiative and honored indeed. I have not been in China for almost a year, but my impression is that the situation on the ground is complex. On the one hand, I think American companies are being treated very carefully and very fairly by the Chinese government. When we have concerns, we are able to take them to the Chinese government, and the Chinese government has been very proactive at trying to resolve normal commercial issues. Also, we are strengthened by the Phase 1 agreement. Both the qualitative or the trade, traditional trade negotiation side, IPR, market access, financial services, agriculture, as well as by the quantitative element. On the other side of the coin, I think that there are many companies, many foreigners who are becoming more concerned about ever-increasing controls in China and the prospect that these will continue. While Americans are perhaps feeling this a little bit more than others, I think it's more generalized, that there is a sense of increasing nationalism that can become very aggressive at times, and that is uncomfortable for many foreigners who might happen to be in China. Further, I think that the objective of the party to increase political controls while liberalizing the market mechanism is something that is of concern to many who live in China. How's that going to work out? These are difficult times. In addition to that, the visa process is getting more difficult, and thus families are separated or afraid if they leave the country they won't be able to get back in, and that certainly adds to the tension. So these are both good and bad times at the same time, and American companies are scrambling. The word you use, I think, is a very good word to describe this, scrambling to get ahead and keep up in a ferociously competitive and complex environment.
That's interesting to hear, and particularly the concerns, with the trade war that has happened and all the many denials, and it's spread across the entire relationship, that it's a difficult place as a person to work, even if the environment might be getting a little more facilitative in terms of actually commercially doing work out there in terms of the policy regime. Let me dive straight into the phase 1 agreement. We've had almost 8 months of implementation of that agreement, and this has been a difficult year because of COVID, and it has had its effects in terms of market purchases. But nonetheless, overall, from the perspective of US business, how do you value the phase 1 agreement and the level of China's implementation? Overall, is China coming through or not, in your view, with regard to the phase 1 agreement?
Well, thank you, Sourabh. So I think that it's useful to divide that question into really 3 parts. The first part is the qualitative or the policy issues. The second part is the quantitative or the export target issues. Yeah. And the third part is the phase 2 agreement. So let me kind of disaggregate the question into those 3 areas and note that on the policy side, I think that the agreement has been a very solid success. Intellectual property rights have improved in a number of different areas, and a good number of American companies are seeing progress there, and I'm happy to get into that. On the agricultural side, we see the removal of some structural barriers and the potential for long-term increases, particularly in animal protein, which I think is a very important structural change. On financial services, many of our members have received licenses or approvals. And so, of course, that's not limited to our members. The Chinese government is really implementing a broad-based liberalization program of its capital markets and welcoming foreign companies with 100% foreign ownership. That's a big change. Now let's talk about the quantitative side. This phase 1 agreement has the traditional trade policy elements, which I just discussed. Also, a very innovative export targeting element, which is a little bit more complex. So I would first like to foreshadow that the U.S. hasn't done agreements of this type in the past. So it's unique, it's nouveau, it's different. And I would say that progress thus far has been uneven. In the agricultural side, as I mentioned, we're seeing significant structural shifts, and I think that most farmers and ranchers and growers should be happy with that. For manufacturing, now that we're almost 4/5 of the way through the year, we're probably at around 30% of the goals. For energy, well, the Chinese have made some large purchases recently Some of those purchases have landed and some of them haven't. So, but I think it's clear that if for no other reason than because of the very low price of energy on the global market, that it's almost impossible for the Chinese to meet their commitments in 2020. And in 2021, unless there's a significant increase in energy prices, it will be difficult. The most difficult area is services. As a result of COVID, education, travel, and tourism have declined precipitously, almost not to zero, but from a very high base, probably for the tourism, probably declined 90% or more. And services are a very important part of our trading relationship with China. And until COVID is resolved and travel gets back, then it's going to be impossible to meet those goals. Now, the third element of this is the potential phase two agreement. And I would say there, we haven't really started. I would argue as strongly as I can that we must not look at phase two as a win-lose, an on-off, a black or white. Rather, we should look at it in terms of trying to find incremental progress on the very difficult issues that were not resolved in the phase one agreement. And by those issues, the important ones are state-owned enterprises, subsidies, cyber policy, technology policy, and anti-monopoly law. There are probably others, but those are the main ones. There, I would say the jury is out. But I would be hopeful that in the new administration, we can begin a dialogue on these issues because it is in China's interest to make progress on them. China cannot escape the middle income trap without making progress on these issues. It's not going to happen. And so it's in both America's interest and in China's interest to make forward progress here without looking for that total victory, total defeat, without looking for that binary kind of false dichotomy of win and lose. We can make progress on this to the benefit of both countries. And that is what I hope we will see.
Sure. Great answer. Let me ask you one small question on phase one and another quick question on phase two. You know, on phase one, there was this impression that Donald Trump wanted these huge purchases so as to ensure his re-election. You know, we are going to have the election now in less than 10 days. And is there any fear at the US business community's end that phase one's implementation is going to continue from of course it's happening at the Chinese end, that the US might pull the plug on phase one for any reason, because once the election is over, I mean, that interest which drove many of those market purchases might not reside. This is just, I mean, I'm just talking hypothetically. Can any tariffs and taxes be imposed after that election on phase one, or just phase one scrap? And question on phase two, a quick question was the real reason why phase two did not come through because China was unable to make those commitments because it was just not at that capacity from a political and development standpoint? Or was it really to do with what they argued was, you know, you want us to put that down in legislation, in national legislation, but we are willing to do these as regulations? And was that just a kind of an escape route for them?
Okay, yeah, so two very good questions. I think on phase one, it's in neither country's interest to pull the plug. And indeed, it would be quite deleterious to US interests if we were to unilaterally do that. The Chinese are purchasing a lot of agricultural products, which are available globally. They don't have to buy from the US. And that would devastate the American rural community if suddenly Chinese agricultural products were to stop. We had a good harvest in 2020. Well, that's a great thing, but prices would be very low without that external demand. And you're not going to make up for that external demand without China. Also on the energy side, the Chinese have shifted some of their purchasing from Saudi Arabia to the United States. And I think that we see that, we appreciate that, and that's a good thing. Now, I would hasten to add that the phase 1 targets are very high, and they were aggressive to begin with. And perhaps in the environment that is shaped by COVID-19, we're not going to get there. But the closer we get there, the better off we are. And so the Chinese government has reiterated its commitment. The US government has reiterated its commitment. I think that the phase 1 agreement is for 2020 and 2021. So the question is, what do we do after 2021? What about 2022, 2023, and beyond that? Clearly, we want to increase US exports to this market, and we want to increase American jobs and prosperity, if you will, by taking advantage of China's engine of economic growth in the global economy. That is not for sure after 2021. So I think that that's really where we should be looking at what would be a successor agreement. Now, for the phase 2, I think that there were many complicating features, some tactical, some political, some legal, and some, if you will, ideological. The arguments within China, within Zhongnanhai, about state-owned enterprises or subsidies or technology policy are incredibly complex, and there are various views on these subjects, and it was not possible to get to a robust agreement on all of those subjects. And thus the agreement was broken into a phase 1 and phase 2. Now, it doesn't mean that there is no agreement on state-owned enterprises, subsidies, technology policy, but it was insufficient, and further progress must be made. Now, again, I will argue, and I think most Chinese economists would agree with me, that further progress on state-owned enterprises is absolutely essential for China to break out of the middle-income trap. And I would say the same thing is true for subsidies and technology policy. China, if it is to become a truly innovative country, truly a developed country, is going to have to allow its innovators, its entrepreneurs, greater freedom within the market context. And it's going to have to welcome and incorporate technologies from abroad. It's going to have to, I would say, address some of the inefficiencies within its own science and technology environment, some of the corruption that is endemic within China, in the university system, within the patent system, and the subsidies going to this university and not that university. But these are things that are ultimately extremely important for China to address. And therefore, I think that there is a big constituency in China to actually converge with global standards on academic research, to collaborate on a free and equal basis, transparent basis with universities around the world, to contribute to the global innovation ecosystem rather than to be parasitical upon that global innovation ecosystem. So in my view, we're going to make incremental progress here. And we're going to keep the channels open. And we have to remember this is not bilateral. We can't decouple because we're not a couple. The Europeans and the Japanese and the Koreans, they have a vote here. And we need to pay attention to that as well and work in concert with our allies, friends, and partners around the world on these very difficult issues. These are not bilateral issues inherently. Inherently, they are multilateral issues, and they should be addressed most effectively from a multilateral perspective.
That's a great point, especially because, you know, the European Union and China are in fairly advanced stages on their comprehensive agreement on investment, and they're talking state-owned industries and industrial enterprises and industrial subsidies, and obviously these matters are very important, and they're difficult challenges for the Chinese government, and that's why, on a related note, can I ask this one question, slightly personal question, but it's about the president himself, President Xi Jinping. I mean, he's championed reform. At the same time, there's this fear that he's also a very statist in terms of how he sees authority being exercised, and an advanced economy doesn't necessarily operate with that sort of top-down authority. And so there is a kind of a dichotomy of view. Is this man a man of reform? Is he or is he not? And just very briefly from your end, if you, on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you put President Xi Jinping in terms of reform, 10 being most reformist?
Well, I think what we're seeing is something that we have never seen before. And that is an attempt to expand political and ideological controls while simultaneously loosening the market controls, if you will, by maximizing the use of market economy mechanisms while maintaining strict controls over the politics. And so I think I would say that he is an economic reformist, but at the same time, he is a political conservative and is very much steeped in the ideology of the Communist Party and, of course, Chinese imperial history, which he grew up with. His father, Xi Jinping, was one of the great reformers. And I have no doubt that Xi Jinping is very cognizant of his father's tremendous contributions, particularly in Guangdong province, but going back to the Yan'an period. So Xi Jinping brings with him both a economic reformist agenda, but with a political tightening agenda. And while that might seem contradictory to many Americans and Europeans, I think that that's exactly where they're going, and that history will tell us whether or not that was a successful gambit or not. But China's economic growth, at least in my view, is going to remain high, and their economy, their macroeconomic management has been superb, and will continue to produce outsized growth in the global economy for, probably the next 10 years. And at that time, I think the demographics of China are going to become very negative for the rest of my lifetime. And so we'll see where we are by that time. But if China does not overcome the middle income trap, does not make these economic reforms in the near term, the demographics are going to weigh it down very severely in the not distant future. So I think now is a great time for reform. I see both positive and negative signs, and I'm not sure which is going to win out in the end.
You know, that's a great point you made in terms of him being the economic reformer and a political conservative. And it's really, time will tell how that dichotomy plays out. And really, I think that captures it really well. Let me get on straight on a related point. And that related point, you know, we're talking about political controls and political controls beginning to intrude into the sphere of private activity. You know, presence of Communist Party units has never been foreign as such for foreign firms because they've been there. But, you know, President Xi is trying to impose them with greater will within private and foreign businesses. And from a US business standpoint, I would ask, how concerned are you about this intrusion of the party's fingerprints in the private sector? And has there really been a shift in the ground and on the ground in terms of the way the party interacts with private businesses and interferes with private businesses, or is this still more in the realm of the theoretical?
Well, it's a great question, and I do think that we are seeing changes. Most of the changes are being felt in China's private sector. So the Chinese companies, private companies, are welcoming Communist Party officials into their corporate structures. And the reports coming out of China are that oftentimes they are very welcome, that these individuals are assisting with regulatory issues and filings and approvals and things like that. For US companies, we have seen thus far very little attempt by Communist Party cells, which, as you say, have existed for a long time, to gain any sort of corporate governance controls. And I think that that's a very good thing, that the political organizations should maintain, be in the proper lane. And if that lane is taking care of social events, funerals, sporting programs, the terrible food in the cafeteria, that type of thing, then I think that it should be quite welcome. But if there is a greater emphasis on getting party voices within the management structure over strategy or purchasing or marketing, then that would be a concern. I do not see that currently, but I wouldn't rule it out either. It's something that we need to watch. I think that it does complicate the picture. And when the lines between private and public in China are deliberately kind of made vague, then I think it's quite harmful for the Chinese economy and the Chinese private sector in general. Private companies should be trying to maximize profits and doing so in a globally ethical and competitive manner. And having a Communist Party advisors at the board level, I find it hard to see how that would advance ethical corporate social responsibility among the private sector in China. And so I think that this deliberate blurring is a complex phenomenon that we should watch carefully. It is not something that I think will assist China's greater convergence with global norms. And it is something that I think that will not help them from a corporate perspective, and something that I think that they should watch very carefully, or particularly outside of China. The unintended consequences of this might be quite negative. Other countries where Chinese investment is high is not going to welcome a Chinese Communist Party cell active in their land, even though that Communist Party cell might be within a state-owned enterprise. There's too much history, particularly in Southeast Asia, for that to be a comfortable thing. Business should be business. Government should be government. Let's go back to the Confucian ideal of zhengming, or the correct names for things. Let us not blend that which should not be blended.
Sure, great. Let me throw that question to you in a slightly different context, turn that around. You know, this is about US business. The question was about how US business is coping with these intrusive Chinese demands. But of late, US business has had its own set of, I wouldn't say troubles, but some difficulties back in Washington itself. You know, we've had Bill Barr, Attorney General, call saying the US businesses might be unwitting pawns for the Chinese government. And Mr. Navarro has said stronger things than that. US business has been the ballast of this relationship. You think this is just a passing phase once China really makes liberal reforms, hopefully it will, that sort of negative stigma will pass? Or are we in an age of great power competition and US business will just have to adjust to a lower profile? What's your view on this?
Well, it's an interesting and a difficult question on the eve of an election in the United States. I would say that both in China and in the United States, that public perceptions of the other country have declined precipitously over the last 3 years. And I regret that very much. And that is driving both governments towards a more hawkish point of view. Certainly, Xi Jinping's emphasis on struggle and then more struggle and yet more struggle is sending yet a pretty clear signal in China, as clear as a signal perhaps that is being sent in Washington. So there is no doubt that the politics are extremely complex. And no CEO wishes to get caught on the horns of that dilemma. And those that have paid a little bit of a price. Listen, a CEO's job is to maximize value. And you're not going to be able to maximize value if the capital of the largest country in the world or the capital of the other largest country in the world, and really they're about equal in terms of GDP right now, is attacking you. And so companies don't want to be weaponized by their governments. They wish to continue to be able to do business in an ethical and legal manner in both countries. And I would say that the Chinese companies doing business in the US have some similar concerns. Is this a passing phase or not? I think that is a very good question. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. If after the election we were to transition to a different administration, I don't expect these problems to go away. I expect them to be presented in a different manner, and I expect the the international institutions, including the WTO and other institutions, will be looked at in a different manner. I would expect that our discussions about these issues would deepen with our allies, friends, and partners around the world. But the fundamental issue isn't going to go away. And further, Congress has very strong views on these subjects. And Congress is not can, but they are passing laws that address some of these issues. So, that will probably change at the margins after the election, but not fundamentally. So we have to be prepared for continued controversy, continued debate, continued conflict, and we need to be able to expand market share in both countries and around the world. We're not going to run away. We're going to manage this situation as adroitly as we can. And I would hasten to say that yes, U.S. exports to China have been hurt. Over the last 2 years, down about 17, 18%. But I think that the reputation of U.S. companies in China remains very good. Chinese consumers want American products. And I would say directly there are some 2.4, 2.5 million Americans employed in working in exporting to China or working on China-related stuff. And indirectly up to 7%, 7 million Americans indirectly employed on China. So this is a big issue that we cannot get wrong. We have to continue our economic engagement with China. China will produce the lion's share of global economic growth over the last 10 years. China will continue to remain extremely innovative, and we gotta be a part of that. And if we're not a part of that, it's at our own expense. So we will continue this process with all due respect to laws in both countries and meeting the highest ethical standards at all times.
Sure, great. Let's stay with the American side, but just step back a little bit beyond China and talk a little bit about multilateral trade liberalization and market opening. You know, the Republican Party has been, for the last 75 years, really been the pillar of support in this regard, always providing the votes for free trade agreements or for ratifications, et cetera, et cetera. For the first time, we've seen, unfortunately, with Mr. Trump, a strain of populism also economic populism becoming part of the Republican Party, which when manifested internationally has been seen to be fairly mercantilist in terms of the way Mr. Lighthizer has gone about his business. And in this context, my question to you is, are we seeing the fading of that pro-trade coalition which we had on the Hill and in American politics? Or is that fading, or is this just a passing phase? And I ask this question with specifically with Trade Promotion Authority, a very, very important piece of legislation which will come up for a vote and might expire very early in the next administration.
Yes, thank you. I do believe that you just put your finger on the most important, if you will, legal instrument here, and that is TPA. Will TPA be renewed? And if so, what will be the conditions or the direction under which it is renewed? And that is an incredibly important subject that I know is being discussed on the Hill as we speak. And the Republican Party and the Democratic Party both have free trade and, if you will, liberal in the classic sense, elements that are very powerful within it. And both also have elements that would be much more nationalistic. And it is true that the Republican Party has moved. And I think it's also true that the Democratic Party has moved. There are 103, 104 new Democrats who are relatively pro-trade. And I think you're going to find in the House. And I think that you're going to find definitely pro-trade Republicans. So the traditional dichotomy has between the two parties has broken down, but there are strong elements in both parties that are pro-free trade. And I think that one of the keys here is the American farming community, agricultural community. And it is interesting to me that they are not as pro-free trade as one would expect, given their huge reliance on global markets. So I think that that is really a kind of a swing factor there, particularly in the Midwest, and particularly in the upper Midwest, soybean, cotton, soybean and corn and grains. So we're going to have to wait and see until after the election and what the coalitions look like. I know that there will be tension with China, but there could be a reassessment of our relationship with Europe, and Japan, Korea, and others. And I think that, at least in my view, it would be worthwhile to look at the CPTPP as a agreement that the United States should consider. I know that President Trump in the past has said that he would look at it. And I think that the Biden administration, if it were to come to pass, will eventually take a good hard look at that and may, in one shape, form, or another, reach out to some of those countries, most of whom that we have free trade agreements with anyway, but to expand those free trade agreements and to perhaps expand around the edges, if not rejoining the CPTPP. But TPP is very important globally and is a good touchstone for anyone, anywhere in the world who looks to defend an open international economic system and worthy of our attention.
Let me come to my concluding set of questions. You've been very, very generous with your time. Thank you. One of those concluding questions is, briefly, will COVID-19, the pandemic, accelerate or hinder the rise of the Asia Pacific? And can I just throw in, along with that question, a decoupling related question? You know, we've had many of these licensing denials and export controls on chips, et cetera, et cetera. My question is, just over the next 10 years, suppose China does make the necessary reforms in industrial subsidies, state-owned enterprises, and plays by level playing field, advanced country standards. Can you see some of those controls actually being removed, if China plays by fair international rules on those in the advanced manufacturing sector?
So those are two very different questions. Let me approach the COVID question and by saying that Asia's done well. And I think a lot of that has to do with their familiarity with epidemic. For us, this was a new thing. Nobody was alive in 1918 that remembers this and could have taught us from our own historic memory. But in Asia, and I would say all of Asia, East Asia, they have epidemic. They're used to wearing masks. They live in very close proximity. And so I would say, I would be very concerned that this will accelerate Asia's, will leap into global leadership, not only China, but including China, and that the US, the EU, and Latin America are going to be hobbled for far too long. And so I think that that is a real, a real concern, particularly if this is going to go out for a year and a half or 2 years, and or if there are long-term effects of the disease that we are not yet aware of, which I think is something that we should be very concerned about. In terms of the longer term, I think that we need to look at China in terms of its demographics. And China's demographics had been about 25 years behind America's. And so they have peaked, and they are headed into a demographic trap that from an economic perspective will be extremely challenging, whereby some 25% of the population is going to be above the age of 65, another 8, 9, 10% of the population under the age of 15. They're going to have one of the highest dependency ratios in the world. And that's going to, ipso facto, going to draw down China's economic growth, depending on total factor productivity, to 2 or 3% in a good year. And that time is coming within the foreseeable future, but it's not here yet. Now, I am hopeful that by that time, China will have fully converged in global governance and will embrace the world on equal terms rather than maintaining this mercantilistic, techno-nationalist, and aggressive stance. And I think that is in the best interest of China, and it is in the best interest of the United States. And it's something that is not here yet, but is, given China's demographics, is not that far away either. So we have a very difficult period to get through over the next few years. But if we're able to manage that, I think that if we're able to manage that diplomatically, then I think that we will be able to manage this relationship over the long term, such that both countries prosper with each other, such that both countries benefit from the relationship, so that both countries have ideas flowing and people flowing freely back and forth, so that neither country is threatened as they both feel right now. So I don't think, while that is perhaps a ways away, I don't think it is unrealistic. And I think that it is something that, given the demographics of both countries, is something that we should really aim for. We have a lot of work to do.
That's right. And certainly China too has lots of work to do. You know, the East Asian model doesn't age very well. They do very well in the early stages of their development, but once they become an advanced consumption and services oriented economy, it hasn't really done, it's not done that well in the other East Asian countries. And that requires a great deal of reform at this stage of development for China. So I think the points you raised are really, really important ones and useful ones and very timely ones, considering that, you know, in a day or two, we will have the early insights about the new blueprint, which will be the 14th five-year plan. And it's important in this context because just prior to the 13th five-year plan was the Made in China 2025 initiative. And we have to see how that ages and how that has aged in terms of this upcoming plan. And therefore, in this context, my last question to you is, suppose you have the year of, say, the Chinese Standing Committee, Politburo Standing Committee, the Politburo, or even the Central Committee, just for a brief, if you needed to tell them something short, something brief, but something important, what would that be?
I think that China needs to fundamentally look at its place in the world as not from the traditional Chinese view of the Central Kingdom, but as one nation among others, equal and playing an important role in the global economy. In terms of domestically, the people of China are extremely industrious, to say the least, and should be given maximum freedom to develop the private sector, technologies, arts and culture, in coordination with whomever they want around the world to maximize the benefits for China and for the world. And that excessive political controls are going to have extremely deleterious effect on Chinese innovation, and they are unnecessary. That China's technology integration in the global community along WTO, by the WTO spirit. I can't say the WTO rules because many of them are quite vague, but in that spirit of equality, of Westphalian respect for sovereignty, but with global standards is in China's interest, just as it is in every other country's interest. And that excessive techno-nationalism or the mercantilistic approach to technology is not any longer in China's interest. If China is going to innovate, and it is going to require a different relationship with the innovators of the rest of the world, which is within sight, it's within reach, but changes, which could be facilitated by the Phase 2 agreement, are required to get there. So I would welcome China to join the OECD. I would welcome China to play a more constructive role in the research and development, the science and technology, and the global innovation ecosystem. And I think that some changes will have to be made to achieve that goal.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughtful views. Thank you for taking time off. Thank you for being a force for good in US-China relations, and wishing you many trips soon after COVID-19 passes, hopefully, and hopefully soon to China. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sourabh. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this initiative. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you.